Okay, Dave, I've spoken enough. That's a lot of announcements. Let's hear what the Holy Spirit's been resting on your heart and mine.
I'm going to go with this for now, see how I get on. It's always a worry when you're being introduced and the guy introducing you says, Dave is going to be preaching to us this morning. However, I'm an idealist. So I thought, great, thanks. No, I understood where you're coming from. That's good. I think we understand each other, Dave and I. We've been going through is this on now? I'm ready to go. Here we go. We're going through a series on the power of one, and Greg and David have been introducing that series to us, and we're talking about the power of you as an individual to have an impact in the world around you, but also the power of reaching just one person. We love looking at the big sort of grandiose gestures that people make and big programs, but we're looking at individuals and the dignity and the inherent value in individuals as you as an individual and the people that you interact with and that you influence in your life. So that's what the thrust of I think I've captured what this series is about the power of the individual. I'm going to be speaking to you today on serving one. And I want to be looking today at Jesus and how he served people. I want to just look, sometimes it's good to look at some of the stories and sort of look at the story behind the story, or the principle behind the story and how he went about it, some of the pressures that he faced and some of the challenges he came up against, which are remarkably similar to the kind of things that we face. But before I do that, I want to provide a little bit of context by going back to 1914. In 1914, it's fascinating, the northern summer, that is specifically the European summer of 1914, was a really fascinating time in history, just before the First World War began. And that was, it was because it was probably the last time that we saw what we could call the old world, the world as it was before the outbreak of war. And the First World War dramatically changed the world, permanently changed the world. More than 60 million people died. But before the war, in fact, there's been books written about, there's a book called July 1914 that talks specifically about what the world was like, how people lived. They had a very simple lifestyle, but a much stronger sense of community than we have. They pretty much lived a subsistence lifestyle, just living day to day. And all of that changed after the First World War. It was so devastating, the war. Not only did it wipe out tens of millions of people in their prime, but also after the war, there was a massive rebuild that had to take place. Normally after a major war like that, you get a really booming economy, like they did in what they call the Roaring Twenties and through the late 40s and into the 50s in particular, where the world really reformed itself. And so I've got a picture of Sydney here about that time, where you can start to see the technology that's starting to emerge. The production, one of the really significant things was that production now was automated. So manufacturing companies were able to produce more and more product to get out to the people. And people, because there was so much activity, there was plenty of jobs and people were starting to have more money. And so one of the problems that developed in the 1920s was that they had to change people's mindset from this subsistence lifestyle where they said, I'm just getting through day to day, because they were manufacturing far more than what they could sell to people. So they enlisted the advertising industry to deliberately create a sense of lack or a sense of deficiency in people's lives. You know, why don't you have, the Joneses down the street, the famous Joneses that we all know about now, down the street, they have a fridge. Why don't you have a fridge? That's the normal thing to do. And so suddenly life started to change. And people started to feel a sense that there's something missing in my life, more than they ever had before. People have always felt that to a degree. But suddenly they were being bombarded with it, and it was being driven into them. And as time's gone on over the last 100 years or so, we've developed a society where the advertising industry has become far more sophisticated, far more manipulative and coercive in the way they manipulate. So I can see sage nods from people who go, yeah, I hear you. We see it every day, don't we? Where we're being bombarded with something that essentially is telling us there's something missing in your life. There's something you lack. There's something you should be discontent about. Unfortunately, we have just the product for you, or just the service which is going to meet your need in its entirety. Isn't that a wonderful coincidence? And so we have this sophisticated world now where, and I put this up because it's a pretty picture, it's nice and colourful, we're dazzled by the bright lights. Nothing is sacred. Even the Sydney Opera House is fair game for advertising. This is actually a light show that was put up for promoting the Vivid Festival a year or two ago. Some of you might have seen this photo. And so this is what we're bombarded with all the time, the dazzling flashing lights, saying, look at me, you need me, you must have me. Your life's incomplete without me. And while we live in a world now where we have probably greater prosperity than any generation has ever had, we've also lost, we have so much, we've also lost so much. And I think one of the things that we've lost is the understanding of the value of serving. Because we live in a get kind of society, but we've lost how to give. And we make occasional forays into, okay, we understand the need. There's people who are missing out. We understand that there's some value in giving to other people, and we make attempts at doing it. But often it's motivated by self-interest, or where it's unsustainable because it's not built on a foundation that is really solid, that is sustainable. And so that's the kind of thing I want to look at today. And I want to show you the contrast between the world we live in and it invades our lives, invades our eyes on a day-to-day basis. And I want to look at the contrast to how Jesus went about it and Jesus' whole ethos towards serving. And I want to base it, or launch it from this verse where Jesus said this, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." The context of this verse was Peter and John were arguing over who should sit at Jesus' right hand. And they were concerned about status. What can I get? What's the recognition that I'm going to receive from Jesus for the wonderful person that I am? And Jesus said the Pharisees lord it over you, and they love to impose their will and their power over you. But he said, it's not to be like that with you. He said, if anyone who's the greatest amongst you must be a servant. Whoever's the greatest must be a servant. And he says, for even the Son of Man, I love that word, even the Son of Man did not come to be served. If anyone in history had a right to come to earth and be served, it was Jesus. Given what he laid aside, what he said, I'm going to leave all of that behind. I'm going to go down there. If they had any idea who they were, who I am, they would fall at my feet and worship me and serve me. But he said, even I didn't come to be served, but to serve. So at that level, Jesus is an example to us. The word Christian literally means little Christ. We're like little Jesuses running around. That's what he's called us to be. And so in that sense, Jesus is absolutely an example and a role model to us. Just as he didn't come to be served, but to serve, so also he's called us to the same thing, the same joy, the same pleasure and delight that we can experience in serving other people. And it's actually not a big deal. What I want to try and do this morning is distill it down to a couple of very simple, hopefully, a couple of very simple observations that we're going to have a look at here that shows that serving is not such a big deal. It's not this onerous task, this burden that, I've got to serve, I have to do it. It's a religious obligation that weighs me down. It's not like that at all. It's actually just part of being human. So let's have a look. First of all, I just want to ask 3 questions. This just gives a bit of frame to what I'm saying, so it isn't just going off in random directions, okay? So who should we serve? I want to have a look at this in Matthew 25. Then the righteous will answer him, and you'll understand the context of this as I go through. Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." There's a couple of things in that passage that I want to draw out. First of all, it's not the big things necessarily that God notices. It's the little things that we often take for granted. If you give someone a drink, you feed someone, you go and visit someone, you stop and you spend time with someone. As you do that, those are the little things are the big things. It's often the trivial things in our lives. One of the things I'm fascinated by is the fact that our lives are a succession of moments and a succession of tiny little decisions that we make, aren't they, that accumulate to a life over a period of 70, 80, 90 years, however long we have. And yet it's often those little decisions that have really profound impacts in our lives down the track, don't they? And so it's the little moments often that have the biggest impact in our lives. And so that we shouldn't neglect the day of small things. I believe that's part of what Jesus was talking about. Don't neglect the little things. It's the little things in our lives. There used to be something that became popular in the early 1990s, I think it was, where people started talking about practicing random kindness and senseless beauty. Do you remember that? And it sort of came and it went away. It sort of died a bit of a death. And I think it was an antidote to people committing random violence and senseless acts of destruction. And they were trying to flip the whole thing on its head and encouraging people to go out and do something nice, just for no reason. Just practice random kindness and senseless acts of beauty. Do something that enriches people's lives, that beautifies the world around you. And I think it was a great principle, but it didn't have the undergirding of why we should do it or how we can sustain doing it. So it sort of fizzled out after a few years, didn't it? We had people who'd go up in the supermarket and they'd join a queue and say to the person in front, "I'll pay for that for you. I'll pay for your shopping." And people just doing all kinds of things like that, which was great for a while. But actually, it was presented as if it was something, and so often these things are, as if it's some great virtue. What an amazing thing. What an amazing person that person is over there, who's always stopping and talking to homeless people or always giving to the poor. But actually, it's something which is just part of our basic humanity, really, isn't it? I mean, we shouldn't really need a medal for it because this is core to who we are as human beings. And people made in the image of God. If we're made in the image of God and we have inherent value in ourselves just by that fact, quite apart from the fact that we've been bought with a price, then how much more should we treat people the same way, who have that same dignity, that same value, and who God sees as so valuable? Yeah, if God provides for the sparrow, will he not also provide for you, who are so much greater, so much more valuable than them? You like that? That's good. Okay, the other thing as well is the connection between what we do for people and the fact that we're doing it for God. Because ultimately, in answer to that question, who do we serve? We're actually serving God. And doing these little things for other people, we're actually reflecting who God is. Jesus came to serve, and as we serve, we're actually carrying out and perpetuating what he did. So when we do these things, no matter how small they are, we're doing what he himself does instinctively for us, and we're spreading it through the brotherhood of man, because we are all brothers and sisters, aren't we, at a very primary level, very raw level. To give you a couple of examples of this, I had a mate in England. As many of you know, I spent a number of years living in England. And I had a mate who worked in London, and he had quite a prestigious job. He was a Lloyd's underwriting agent, worked in the financial district in London, in Cornhill, that some of you would know. And it used to really bother him. There's so many homeless people in London. It used to really bother him when every day he would have people coming up to him asking him for money, for food. And he knew that most of the time these guys, all they wanted was the money for drugs or alcohol or whatever it might have been. And he said, I want to be nice to them, but I don't know how to because I know it's not going to help them ultimately. So what he did was he started, instead of giving them money, he'd say, come and have lunch with me. And he'd go and take them to a cafe or restaurant, wherever he was going for lunch, and he'd sit down and talk to them and befriend them. And sometimes when I was in London, I'd go and I always knew where he'd be, the kind of places he'd be. And I'd go and find him, and there he was. He was always very well turned out, really well presented. And there he'd be with some raggedy old homeless guy, deep in conversation, really intent conversation. And I thought, this is one of my role models, this guy. He's only a few years older than me, and he was only in his late 20s. But he would sacrifice his lunchtime sometimes and go, right, I've got to have lunch. I'm under pressure. I've got a high-pressure job. But no, I can actually take time out to do things like that. It's not the really big things. It's just a little thing. Yeah. Another thing that another role model of mine was my mother, who's a magnificent woman. She died about 4 years ago. But even into her 80s, she would just, whenever she went into a shop and she went to the till, she'd always just engage at some level with the person at the till. And sometimes you get some sort of young teenager there who'd look at me with this sort of look of fear on their faces. Even in her 80s, she used to do this. And she'd just engage in some sort of banter or some light-hearted little quip, little joke and that kind of thing. And they didn't know quite what to do. They thought, old ladies don't do this. You just sort of keep your head down and you pay your money, especially she lived in England for the last few years of her life. And they were a bit mystified about this lady who was making jokes and in this sort of engaging in this banter with them. But those little things, and this was an inspiration to me for many years before she died. Little things like that can make such a difference in people's lives. We can go in to the supermarket, we pay at the supermarket, and you can pass through and barely say a word that can exchange, especially with those barriers up now. And we can pass like ships in the night and not say a word. But how do we know what that person's going through in their life? Or you don't have to engage in a 20-minute conversation and give a full presentation of the gospel or anything like that. It's just being nice, saying thank you, and being thoughtful, and just engage with them as a human being on a very simple level. One of the things I love about living in Port Macquarie is the fact when people walk down the street, people smile or say hello to each other, say g'day as you're passing each other. That's something you don't get in the city, and something I missed when I lived in the city. It's just simple gestures like that, and it's just being human and recognising each other's humanity as we go about our daily lives. It's a challenge to me, and I try to do that, but with mixed success. I was walking down Horton Street a couple of weeks ago, and I was sending a text message. You know the thing, you're walking along, sending your text message, and in the space of about 100 metres, 2 old ladies had to get out of my way, and they were going, oh, sorry. And I stopped, and I thought, what am I thinking? What am I doing? I was so preoccupied with this text message I have to send right now that I've completely lost the humanity around me. And I'm not making some massive statement. It's just a simple, basic thing that we get so caught up in what we're doing that we lose the world around us, don't we? And imagine if we just did that every day. If there's someone who's working at the till at the supermarket, and all day people come through, never a word's exchanged, and they're suicidal. How do you think they're going to feel at the end of the day? It's just going to confirm all the fears, all of the negativity that's going on in their head is just going to escalate. But if we can actually foster and create a kind of culture, a subculture, where we just talk to people, they might go, well, 10 people actually smiled and engaged with me at some level today. So maybe there is actually hope in the world. Maybe there is something out there. That happened with me when I was a teenager. I used to go to a milk bar and buy chocolates a lot. And the guy who worked there, who owned it, was really grumpy, really rude. And I was immature, so I didn't understand, so I just got in there and got out and whatever. But I had no idea He actually made a couple of really kind gestures to me over the years, which I didn't acknowledge. But I found out later this guy had ended up committing suicide. And I thought, hang on, I came and went almost every day from his milk bar, and I never said a word, never said anything affirming or positive, even good morning or afternoon or whatever it was. I don't think I'm responsible for that. But every day he would have had people coming and going, saying, I'm not going near him. He's a bit grumpy. I don't want to take the risk. And actually he just was in a world of pain that I had no idea about. And I don't know all the circumstances around it. But this is the kind of world we live in, isn't it? I'm talking about the scars. Fantastic what Coral said, wasn't it? About the scars. It's so true. We all carry scars. And as part of being part of the solution, because of what God's done for us, we can now, as we have opportunity, go out and be part of the solution in other people's lives with just very simple things. I've got to move on. Where should we serve? I'm going to have a look at a couple of examples here. Let's have a look at this. Jesus entered Jericho. He was actually on his way to Jerusalem, and he had a very big week ahead of him, culminating in his crucifixion and resurrection. So he had somewhere to go. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Jesus was going somewhere. He was on his way to Jerusalem. He had something really important there over the next week in Jerusalem, which was going to change the course of human history in a way no one else has ever changed human history. Yeah, and he was only passing through Jericho. And he had every reason to say, no, I'm too busy. Yeah, I've got a lot on my mind. I've got to prepare. I know the kind of pressures I'm going to face there. The last thing I need is this guy distracting me. And what did he do? He stopped. And he looked up in the tree and he said, come down, I'm coming to your house because you need something from me. And sure enough, Zacchaeus' life was turned around. And he gave back 4 times everything that he'd stolen from the people that he'd embezzled over the years. Let's have a look at another one. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who'd been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding around and pressing against you. Why bother? We've got something much more urgent to do here. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. What a tragedy. Was that a tragedy, the story of Jairus' daughter? Not the way it turned out, was it? It was actually amazing. Jesus said, no, she's just asleep. I've got it in hand. It's okay. I can afford to stop because someone touched me, something that seems insignificant, even in what seems like a crisis. Jesus said, I've come to serve, and I listen to everything my Father tells me to do, and I do it. I can just carry it out. It's really as simple as that. So he said he had somewhere to go to heal a dying girl, and yet he had the presence of mind to say, there's someone who needs me right now. The girl can wait. She did wait, and she was healed. It's just another story of God's grace and his love and his power at work, wasn't it? Yeah. And it's as simple as that, isn't it? We're all busy. We've all got things going on. I'm probably not as busy as some of you, but there's always something pressing in on us. Always something that has to be done. Always a reason why we can't stop and say, hang on, This person needs me now. This situation is important. It's very simple, isn't it? And because I value this lady with the issue, I don't know what her issue was. We've all got issues. But you like that one, Jane? But he said, no, I'm going to stop and I'm going to honour her humanity, because she wanted to hide in the background. She eventually goes, she realised she couldn't go unnoticed. And so he was able to heal her. I'll give you another example of one of my sisters. We flew to England about 10 years ago for my dad's 80th birthday, and we hadn't flown together since we were kids. And we were at Melbourne Airport just about to leave in the departure lounge, and there was this young guy who's about 18 or 20 who was like a motocross or BMX rider, sort of championship rider. He was just this young guy. And his dad, they were on their way to Japan to take part in a competition. And my sister's just brilliant at engaging with people and just chatting. So we started talking about motocross, talking about them, where they'd come from, and she knew the town where they lived in regional Victoria, and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, before you knew it, there's all the people in our sort of, you know how they're all lined up opposite each other in the airport lounges. Suddenly there's about 6 or 8 people all talking to each other, and somehow my sister's managed to facilitate this conversation. I was chatting to this guy next to her. I turned back, and blow me down, my sister's talking to them about the gospel. It was only a couple of minutes. I turned away, and in a perfectly natural, normal way, and just sharing the gospel with them. I'm like, how'd you do that? Anyway, they went off, and we got on our plane, and we got to Hong Kong, and we had to change planes, so we had to go down the other end of the airport. And I was thinking, we don't want to miss it. We want to head down there. And then all of a sudden, there was this woman with 3 young kids in front of us, and the youngest was having a meltdown. She was just total massive tantrum. She was only about 2 or 3. And I thought, well, poor woman. And it turned out that she, but I've got a plane to catch. And my sister just knelt down and she started talking really gently and kindly to the little kid. And she's I did the wrong thing. I won't do that again. And she's just got a really gentle manner about her, and she's just a natural in these situations because she does it all the time. It's second nature to her because that's the mindset that she lives her life in. And the kid really responded to her and calmed right down. And she looked after her while the mother was trying to get everything else organised. They gave me a couple of bags to carry, and I'm thinking, hang on, I didn't sign up for this. And we went off down, and she was catching the same plane as us, so she was trying to find the gate, and my sister just helped her, and we got on the plane and headed off, and I fell asleep, and then when I woke up, my sister wasn't there. And a few minutes later, she wandered back down the aisle, and I said, where have you been? She said, I just went and found that lady. I was having a chat with her, and they'd been chatting for about half an hour. I had no idea what they talked about, but it was just such an inspiration to me that just a simple thing like that, what would you have done in that scenario? Probably what I've done, maybe what she does, or what she did in that situation. But we go, I've got something I've got to do. That's not what I need, is that sort of distraction. That's her problem, not mine. It turned out they were heading on to Ireland, so they had another leg on their journey. And her husband was in Australia and wasn't able to travel with them, so she had the 3 kids by herself. My sister, who has 4 kids, who've all grown up, she was in a position, she had the opportunity to serve, and she just did it. I went, man, I'm really bad at this. That's what I was thinking to myself. I thought I was a nice guy. But what it really comes down to is this. It's a matter of just being kind and being aware of people around you and showing kindness and care for people. Is anyone here incapable of being kind? Yeah? No? I think so. We're in good company. And it's just being nice. That's a lot of what serving is just being nice to people. There's plenty of people who don't behave nicely. Perhaps you're one of them. I'm one of them sometimes. And serving is really a very simple matter of just being kind to others. And we're all capable of it. It's just a matter of, do we do it? And how often do we do it? Do we make a habit of it, or is it just an occasional thing which we then expect a medal for it? and some sort of plaque in our memory or something. Or we just do we do it because we're human and we're dealing with other human beings? I'll move on because there's plenty more. I could give you so many stories. When should we serve? The third question. So where should we serve? It's just wherever we are, even if it interrupts. Jesus had the same pressures. When should we serve? Okay, this is another story. This is the story of the woman of Samaria. Now, he had to go through Samaria. So he was on his way to Galilee, I think, at this point. So he came, this is Jesus, came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" I don't know why he didn't say please, but I'm sure that's he did, but it wasn't recorded. Knowing Jesus, I'm sure he did. And we know how that story plays out, don't we? We know that he gave her a drink and then he started speaking to her, and then she went off and got all her friends and they came back and he spoke to them and they all got saved. He ended up staying 2 days there, speaking to people, and a whole load of people got saved. But have a look at the beginning of it. He says Jesus, tired as he was from the journey. He was tired. He didn't need this. That was the last thing probably on his mind was, okay, let's look for an opportunity to speak into someone's life and transform a town. Because he was going somewhere, and it was pretty rugged ground too that he had to go through. Have a look at another story. This is the feeding of the 5,000. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognised them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. This is quite funny in the context of what we're talking about, this story. I think it makes me laugh anyway. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. By this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Good advice, you would have thought. But he answered, "You give them something to eat." So they're already tired and hungry. They're hangry. Jesus says, "Okay, let's hop in a boat, and I want you to row me across to the other side of the lake." Okay, well, at least we'll get a bit of peace over there. They get over there. There's a massive crowd in thousands of people. And what does Jesus do? He starts to teach them. He goes, "Okay, well, this probably isn't the best time," but you sit there listening. And then at the end of it all, they say, "Well, now everyone's really hungry." And he says, "Okay, well, I want you to cook their dinner then." You think, well, hang on, Jesus. When does this actually end? And again, we know how the story turns out, don't we? Because Jesus provided everything that they needed. But I just love the way that Jesus says, "Okay, now I want you to do this, now I want you to do this." And they're going, "Can you just give us a break? Because we're tired." Who's tired? Who is tired? I get tired. I'm often tired. Yeah? But tiredness wasn't a barrier to Jesus carrying out what he'd come to do, or to serve people, because there's still people that are in need, still people needing help. Yeah? And it's the same is true of us. Tiredness isn't an excuse, just as busyness isn't an excuse. Let's just serve, because we're part of a human race of people who God loves, and he wants us to love in the same way. How do we get that energy to sustain it? Because you can only sustain that so long. And this is one of the keys, I believe, to being able to live a life serving other people. Isaiah 40 says this, "Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who wait on the Lord," those who spend time with God in God's presence, the source of our strength, they will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. We know this. This is not new. is anyone not familiar with this verse? It's really quite simple, isn't it? We draw strength from God. And these are the two things. This is what I want to distill it down to today. The two things. We draw our strength from God. We know that. We spend time in God's presence. That's where we get our strength. That's where we overcome our tiredness. Yeah? And then the second thing is that we recognise the humanity of the people around us. Every one of us were created as a unique creation by God. And to turn a blind eye to them and go about our daily life, me, get. It's capitalism gone mad. I believe capitalism's a good thing. But rampant consumerism has overtaken us, where it's all about me. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about us. Yeah? We're part of a human race. And so as we understand the value of the people around us, and we spend time drawing strength from God that he says he provides, then it's really quite simple. We've just got to be kind. Have I distilled it down to something far too simple? Or is this just really what it is? It's just what it is, isn't it? Okay, I just want to finish with this. Didn't quite fit in. My formatting's not quite right. It says, do not give up doing good. You know this verse in Galatians 6. Do not give up doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good things to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Just want to unpack that a little bit very quickly, just in finishing. First of all, do not give up. We know where our strength comes from, so we've addressed that. And there's a certain amount of enlightened self-interest in there, isn't there, with this? Only a certain amount, because we don't draw our strength from the world. We don't draw our strength from necessarily the reward that we receive. We draw our strength from God himself. In sales, I was talking to Paul Bettinson about this beforehand. In sales, one of the principles in sales, they say, if you give enough people what they want, you will end up with what you want. And that's the enlightened self-interest. But it's still self-interest, isn't it? So it's not what motivates us. But the point of this verse is not so much that give and serve in order to get back, but give because God knows what you need and he'll provide it. You don't have to worry about that. It's not even an issue. Yeah? And the second part of this says this: therefore, as we have opportunity, you don't have to break the bank trying to create the next big thing. There's plenty of people out there doing stuff who need help, aren't there? The reality is, this is a reality in business. Most people don't run businesses. Most people work for them. And it's exactly the same with any organisation, any enterprise that anyone engages in. Some people are trailblazers. We know stuff going on in this church, or people in this church who are involved with things around the world. Not everyone is a trailblazer creating something new. But we can all get involved with something. As I say in sports coaching to the parents in sporting teams, if everyone does something, the job gets done. If it's all left to a handful of people, it becomes really stressful. We get burnout, don't we? So as opportunity arises, opportunities will arise. If you have any contact at all with the human world around you, opportunities will arise for you to give and for you to serve. And finally, the final thing I want to say is this, is where do we start? Because I believe it, and this verse states quite clearly, this works in concentric circles. So it says, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers. So if you don't know where to start with your own brothers and sisters, people in this room, people in your life group. How can I serve them? What opportunities do I have to do that? I know you do this instinctively because I see it happens in my life group. And we do that with each other. We serve. So how can we do it? We start with each other, our own family, and then we work outwards from that.